is the desire, the need to understand, the rationalizing, trying to fit God's process to align it with our expectations. Could that be one of the greatest things that holds us back? See, what we see is God has so much more for His people, so much more He wants to do for His people. But why is it we so rarely see that? Why is it we so rarely see people who are truly God-powered? So we're looking at, over the next few episodes, we're looking at what it takes for us to align ourselves with God so we can truly receive all that He has for us, that we can go for all of it. And one of the biggest challenges, one of the first things for us to do is to come to the place where we recognize that we don't have to understand, that we can set our understanding aside and display a greater trust. And let me give you a great example. So God brought His people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt, out of their bondage. And He did so with this tremendous display of His power. Now, on top of that, they came out blessed, right? They plundered the Egyptians. They took all this wealth with them. And God is going before them. And He has reiterated over and over and over that His promise that He was taking them to the promised land. So we could understand if they mistakenly thought this would be easy. So hang on, loving God has moved on our behalf with power. He's blessed us. He's going before us. And He's promised us this promised land. We would expect that a loving God would make it easy, right? But the process didn't align with their expectations. So what do we see? We see that so often they were discouraged because they didn't understand. There were times on the journey where they came to a place there was no water, where they were attacked by their enemies, where they had to trust God for their meal. And this didn't align with their expectations. But see, what God had for them was so much greater. See, the promised land, from His perspective, was an inheritance. And for them to truly lay hold of it, for them to receive all that He had, meant that they had to develop a greater degree of faith. They had to have a deeper level of trust. See, all of those challenges were working to their good, but they didn't understand that. And so often what happened? They didn't understand. It didn't look like they expected it to. And so what would they do? They would reflect on what they wish they had, which so often was stuck back in the past. And anything they were doing without was only temporary because God had so much better waiting for them. Now, I don't think that they literally wanted to give up on God, but they wanted to compromise, I think. In other words, we want God, but we don't want this to be hard, so we just want to kind of take a few steps backwards and just have those old blessings and have God and not have this journey, this challenge that we're facing. And because of that, they missed out on so much of what God had for them. Now, it's easy for us to look at them and kind of be judgmental, like, what were you thinking? But don't we do the same? I have. When we face challenges, when we're in something we don't understand, when it's difficult, when it's painful, our natural reaction so often is to reflect on what we wish we had. Or how often do we not act on God's word and His promises because we don't understand why it has to be that way, rather than just saying, okay, God, I trust you. And why is this important? See, just as the promised land represented an inheritance that God had for His people, the journey was a process of developing them so they could actually receive that inheritance. And God has an inheritance for you and I. See, it is His promise, His word. These are promises. This is our inheritance for here and now, and it will eventually culminate in heaven. But the promises are for this life. But just like the children of Israel had to be trained, had to develop to actually receive that inheritance, we go through the same thing in life. And there are moments when it is difficult, it's painful. But this is where, rather than beginning to reflect on what we think we don't have, what we think we need, what we think we want, this is the time to truly display our trust. that we will set aside our understanding, our rationalizing, and rely completely on God, that what He has for us is actually truly better than anything we've had to give up. You know, there's a great quote from the book of Job. Yes, I'm quoting from Job. He went through so much, and we don't understand why a loving God would allow this, other than God was glorified by Job's faithfulness, in spite of it all. But there comes a moment when God shows up towards the end, and He says something profound. And He says, "Who questions my wisdom in ignorance?" In other words, what He's saying is God's wisdom is infinite, and our understanding is so finite. So I think the point is, for you and I, this is the time, this is the challenge to say, God, I truly want all that you have for me. And in spite of my understanding, in spite of my expectations, no matter what I see, that I truly am completely putting my trust in you to receive all that you have for me.